with a record like Trump's, who, to put it mildly, he hasn't been what you'd call a feminist, to say something like that to a journalist when they're discussing such serious subject matter, the assault of women and girls by a sex offender, and to question the president's role in that. I think sometimes you have to think that the subject matter needs to be taken with a certain amount of seriousness.
Let's pick up there, Michael and Lucy. We were talking about France, we were talking about the Ukraine. It's a tough old world. And key central to all of this is Trump, of course, and we've touched on him and the substantial stuff. But a little bit about Trump the man, this ongoing kind of reality TV show or Netflix series, if you want, that each one starts with something very dramatic and ends with a cliffhanger. This is what life in the Oval Office seems to be now. And in the middle of it, there's this sort of bizarre twist, almost like one of these Spanish Casa de Papel type subplots. And I'm going to ask you, Lucy, because it's one of your colleagues, actually, at Bloomberg, a very respectable journalist. I don't know if you know her, but she was dismissed as piggy while asking an unwelcome question. I mean, do you know her? Do you tell us more about the background? What happened?
I've never met her in real life, but I have, often talked to her on stories that we're both working together on, and I have to express my sympathy with her being insulted by her president. I think it is kind of, maybe you would think that perhaps you take it as an award at this point coming from President Trump if you rattle him enough to get such a insult. But I think it's kind of emblematic of this inability to face any kind of challenge or scrutiny that he has. And piggy, it's just like it's a playground insult. It just makes him seem childish.
It's mad, isn't it? And then we've got this fascinating figure. I genuinely find her fascinating, not least because she's doing a similar job in a way, but she's at the lectern, Caroline Leavitt, who's the White House spokesman, and this is how she actually defended what Donald Trump had done.
And I think it's one of the many reasons that the American people reelected this president, because of his frankness. And he calls out fake news when he sees it. He gets frustrated with reporters when you lie about him, when you spread fake news about him and his administration. But he also is the most transparent president in history. And he gives all of you in this room, as you all know, unprecedented access.
What do you make of that, Michael? Well, and is an insult from Donald Trump a sort of badge of honour? Would you sort of put it on your mantelpiece if you could?
Well, as Lucy said, the word piggy is really ridiculous. I mean, it's almost affectionate, not quite. I mean, it's an insult. It was meant as an insult. It's just a stupid insult. But because it's like that, I think, yes, one could say, I'm the piggy. You put up a little plaque, the one known as Piggy or whatever. It's stupid. I think he reacts like a playground silly boy. I mean, he is so narcissistic that anyone who challenges him must be therefore wrong. It must be fake news. We've heard all this many times before, and reporters challenge him at their peril. I think his press secretary does an amazing job trying to defend him, and she is the ultimate pro. And the way she manages to turn this around so that it's not quite as damaging as it would be. Clever, good for her. He's got the right person there.
Do you have a soft spot for her, Lucy?
I mean, luckily I don't have to deal with her too much. I leave that to my US colleagues. But I think, it's certainly a good defence that she manages to put up for him. But to kind of say that it's fake news or lying about the president to ask questions about Jeffrey Epstein, which I think was the question that drew the piggy response. Is that believable?
I remember being a political journalist on the coalface, and New Labour were very powerful, and not many people questioned them. And on the World in One, we did every day do something that annoyed them until Gordon Brown's team, led by Charlie Whelan, who's quite a colourful character back then, had T-shirts made, and there was a variation on, let's say, World at One to something else beginning with W. That suggested that we were not the best people. So it kind of, it's not unprecedented. But I'm thinking of another US president, and I don't know if you've read Nick Robinson's account of this, but he was standing outside 10, and George Bush Jr., I think, came out and said, better get that slap of yours out of the sunshine. You're burning. To which Nick, never in much self-doubt, shall we say, said, I never knew you cared. And he kind of goes, I don't. What an extraordinary exchange. But again, isn't it, journalists dish it out. I've been on both sides of this divide. I've been a journalist, putting politicians in their spot, and I've been the director of comms on the other side. Don't you deserve, when you dish it out so much, Lucy, to sort of take the odd hit? I know you're the polite end of the profession, but a lot of people are pretty rough on politicians. Politicians are entitled to throw the odd whack back, are they not?
I mean, I think there's always going to be a little bit of backwards and forwards, and that's kind of what makes the job so fun. And, we can't be utterly serious all of the time. But I think with a record like Trump's, who, to put it mildly, he hasn't been what you'd call a feminist, to say something like that to a journalist when they're discussing such serious subject matter, the assault of women and girls by a sex offender, and to question the president's role in that. I think sometimes you have to think that the subject matter needs to be taken with a certain amount of seriousness.
Ukraine. I don't know about you, Michael, but I was in number 10 when Russia invaded. I listened in on the call when President Zelensky told Boris Johnson, Prime Minister at the time, what had happened. I felt sick in the pit of my stomach. And because of that, I am not unbiased about this. I feel a violent reaction to anything that treats Ukraine as the perpetrator, not the victim. But yet again, we have a plan on the table now that apparently their briefing from the White House is something that they want to see accelerated on an aggressive timeline. This is what Donald Trump wants. It seems to me to yet again be putting pressure on Zelensky, not on the guy who's actually responsible for this war. What do you make of it?
Well, you're absolutely right, yes. And poor Zelensky has to put up with yet another plan which basically gives Putin everything he's demanded. He hasn't changed his demands from the start. He's always said Ukraine has to essentially disarm, it must never join NATO, it must promise that it will not do anything to hasten the arrival or the security of Western forces in Ukraine, essentially must give in. And the Americans seem to be biting on this every time. I mean, that was essentially the demand in Alaska. Mr. Trump didn't attempt to change that. He just sort of talked around it. The Russians are quite clear that any kind of concession must include all the territory they now occupy and the rest of the provinces where they don't occupy, which include those towns that are still holding out, which are actually well fortified. I mean, Pokrovsk is a sort of Stalingrad at the moment. I mean, it's more or less in ruins, but they're fighting over the ruins. But the Russians want it just presented on a plate. And I don't quite know why Mr. Trump thinks that once that war is settled, then he's settled all the big wars in the world. He just wants a deal. Doesn't matter what the terms, he wants a deal.
And he wants a Nobel Peace Prize, which would be, to be fair, would be a slam dunk, I think. And I'd recommend him for it if he pulled this off. But he just doesn't seem to be going about it the right way. Is there, looking at how it is, Lucy, is there anything European leaders can do, other world leaders can do, that takes on the initiative and takes it away from where it seems to be stuck, where Putin is basically dictating his terms to the White House? I
mean, I think it's really difficult for other European leaders to lead the way on this, because everyone at the moment is kind of freaking out about their own defence budgets and how they would, tackle Russia if Russia was to become an aggressor further into Europe. I mean, we've heard comments from other European leaders this week. I don't know what it is that we can do other than kind of try and work together to propose an alternative to what President Trump is putting forward, and kind of show that we are a united front against that kind of, as Michael said, it's more about a deal, I think, for him than anything else. I mean, I do have to wonder, I think, what position the UK is with the US right now, because, we heard Keir Starmer say earlier this week that he was due to have a conversation with President Trump at the weekend, and Trump just never called. So obviously the talks must have been happening around that time between Trump and Putin. So I do wonder where the UK is now finding itself in this kind of conversation with the US.
Interesting. There is a Trump-Zelensky call scheduled in the week. From my experience listening into loads of conversations between Zelensky and Boris, he is such a consummate negotiator. He's got humour, he's got resolve, he knows exactly what he wants, but he's actually charming and shrewd with it. But we all saw the car crash first time he was in the Oval Office. Is he in a significantly better place with Donald Trump now? And can he actually work a little magic over Donald Trump, do you think, Michael?
Well, sadly, no. In fact, I think the opposite is true. He's in a more difficult position. First of all, because militarily it's not going his way. Everybody knows that. They have suffered huge losses. But more significantly, he's had a big political setback with this corruption scandal. £100 million or dollars, $100 million, I think, worth of corruption siphoned off from the defence budget, or particularly the resilience budget, to protect Ukraine from drones. Now, that has caused a huge row, has undermined his government, has led to a lot of opposition calls for him to sack his chief advisor and his other intimates around him. I think that makes it very difficult, and the Russians, of course, are exploiting it as much as possible. There is bad blood there. There always has been between Trump and Zelensky, because Trump is furious that Zelensky wouldn't play ball when Trump was running for election the first time round and was trying to undermine, the second time round, trying to undermine Biden by getting the dirt on his son's activities in Ukraine. And Zelensky refused to provide what he wanted. So that started off on a bad foot. I think it's not any better now. I mean, they've had conversations where they've all been nice to each other in public, but deep down I think Trump feels Russia's a big power. That's the one that matters. Why should we bother with Ukraine?